Welcome to the conference. First session. Looks like a really, really good session this morning about all sorts of different aspects of rehab. We've got some research, we've got some campaigns, we've got some really, really great activities that are going on in the rehab space. So I hope this will be a really exciting session. I'm Ruth Tenhove. I'm Assistant Director, one of the Assistant Directors at the CSP, and really pleased to welcome you this morning. So, first speaker is Laura Cromley, who's going to speak about exploring recovery and rehab experiences of adults with traumatic injury. Thanks, Laura.
Hello. Okay, can everyone hear me all right for that? Mic is on. Good. So as Ruth said, my name is Laura Cromley, and today I'm very excited to kick off the CSP conference by sharing my research on the recovery experiences of individuals after a traumatic injury. This project was completed as part of my doctorate of physiotherapy degree at Robert Gordon University and completed with the assistance of my supervisory team, Dr. Lindsay Alexander, Professor Kay Cooper, and Dr. Angela Gall. Oh dear. Oh, there we go. Okay. A recovery journey can be looked at as a timeline. Oh. And the timeline. There we go. We have our timeline. Okay. This timeline starts when an individual sustains a physical injury. This individual is then rushed to the nearest emergency department or major trauma center, where they receive medical attention from a multidisciplinary team, and they start with the rehabilitation with the aim to get them home as soon as possible. So a lot of previous research has kind of been focusing on this part of the recovery journey with kind of that pre-hospital and acute care. But once these patients get home, what happens next? So this research was completed in collaboration with the North of Scotland Trauma Network, which was in the first phase of development when I started this research back in 2021. This question of kind of what happens next is what the clinicians at the major trauma center wanted to know. What happens to their patients after they go home from the hospital? So in kind of creating this study, we had to kind of pick a specific study population. So we were looking at individuals with moderate and major traumatic injuries, so those that were admitted to hospital with more or more severe injuries based on their injury severity score, or ISS. We were also looking specifically at non-neurological injuries, and the main reason behind this is because individuals with traumatic brain injury or spinal cord injury they have a different management and prognosis than those, say, with multiple fractures or chest and abdominal injuries, and so their experiences throughout their recovery would be different than those with neurological injuries. And so so say a patient is admitted with multiple fractures, then they're discharged. Once they're medically stable, they're discharged home, and a lot of their recovery happens in an unsupervised setting. So the aim of this research was to explore what happens to, or the recovery experiences of adults with non-neurological, major and moderate traumatic injuries after discharge from the acute care setting. So this study was part of my doctorate, and so at first I conducted a qualitative systematic review, and while I can't go into the findings of that, I do have a poster, I think it's number 20, so you can come find me at lunch if you have any questions and to look at the findings of that. But this also identified that there were no previous qualitative studies on recovery experiences in the Scottish context. Therefore, I did a qualitative study on the recovery experiences. And so with this, I won't go into the nitty-gritty, but I conducted 21 interviews and analyzed them using a type of thematic analysis. And so in qualitative research, context is quite important. So before I jump into the findings, I'll first introduce the participants. So with this research, we were aiming for kind of collecting a wide range of perspectives. So out of the 21 participants, we had about half male, half female, with a range of ages, both male and female, with the youngest at 20 years of age up to 82 years of age. The most common mechanism of injury The most common mechanism of injury was transportation related, followed by an injury during a recreational activity, followed by falls. At the time of the interview, participants were 1 to 2 years after or post-injury, at the time of the interview, they were 1 to 2 years post-injury, And all of the participants resided within NHS Grampian, but they did represent a variety of geographical locations, including urban, rural, and remote rural. So now that you've met the participants, I'd like to share what they had to say. So after analyzing all 21 interviews, I identified 3 main themes, which I'll share in turn on the following slides very quickly. So the first theme is on the management of physical impairments and psychological aspects throughout recovery. The second theme is on recovery, rehabilitation, and participation experiences. And the third theme was on support, services, and that wider impact of injury throughout recovery. So I'll kind of breeze through the first 2, but introduce the topics, but then spend a bit more time on theme 3. So this first theme was related to participants' experiences that were kind of most closely related to the individual. So this included kind of physical recovery experiences of kind of those initial impairments at the time of discharge home, but also enduring physical impairments that people had at the time of the interview. Psychological recovery experiences, participants spoke about kind of psychological well-being and also challenges that they had that came at different times throughout their recovery. And as you can imagine, pain management and experiences also came up kind of in that initial recovery, but also throughout for the participants. So this next theme relates to experiences about kind of those activities and participation and kind of how individuals engage in or interact with their environment. As you can imagine, they spoke about kind of their initial experiences of time at home. They're limited in what they're able to do, and this often related to kind of their physical impairments. They spoke about their functional recovery experiences, and oftentimes they're the most excited at talking about kind of those functional tasks of kind of progressing their mobility or independence with their activities of daily living, and how they saw these as milestones in their recovery. During recovery, they also spoke about the rehabilitation activities that they engaged with, and some mentioned kind of this aspect of self-management and engaging in these rehabilitation activities independently, but valuing input from healthcare professionals. And lastly, a number of the participants were working prior to the injury, and so even with those with a phased return, fatigue was a really commonly mentioned challenge for those of kind of getting back into work. So the last theme is kind of about those wider experiences about kind of the environmental factors. So participants reported receiving support from many people throughout recovery, with the majority of support provided by kind of their partners and immediate family. And this relates to the next sub-theme of kind of that wider impact of the injury. Because of this required support, some reported that this did have a large impact on kind of their immediate family and especially on their partners, with this participant saying, "This trauma severely disrupted the life of everyone around me, in particular their partner." Now, these last 2 sub-themes are where we as healthcare professionals play a direct role in the recovery experiences. So participants reported accessing a variety of services throughout recovery, both NHS and private, and overall reported a positive experience working with the local trauma team, appreciating kind of the accessibility and the coordinated approach to care. There are many other things as well. You can ask questions about that after, but in the sense of time, I will continue on to healthcare professional information provision and communication. And so this had the most mixed views, where some participants reported receiving all the right information at the right time and having really positive communication with all the healthcare professionals they came across. Others kind of reported a bit different story of these mixed views, and how they described this in interviews was that there was a bit of uncertainty in their recovery, and this usually came from either a lack of communication or a lack of information. Participants reported most of their recovery-related information was provided verbally, and for some, this worked because they were able to have kind of a partner come in and sit in on follow-up appointments with them, but for others, they thought that having kind of a written discharge summary, or just kind of written recovery-related information would have been useful, because in this participant situation, they didn't know their injuries when leaving the hospital, and so when people are asking them, "Okay, so what have you done?" they were saying, "I don't know, but I can't walk, my arm is sore, and I can't sit up in bed without crying, and I don't know what's wrong." So kind of having this information early and available would be beneficial in reducing uncertainty throughout recovery. So focusing on that last sub-theme with information, throughout the interviews, I kind of collated a list of all the different types of information that would have been useful. And if you have questions on this, I might kind of whiz through this slide. As mentioned on the previous one, some patients thought it would be useful to have a patient-oriented discharge summary of kind of their injuries and basically what has happened to them from the time of the injury, what injuries they have, up into all the interventions that they received in hospital. Other types of recovery-related information that people either found useful or would have found useful includes kind of those expectations for recovery, resources for pain management, and resources for enabling independence with ADLs, because they require so much support from people, especially in that initial recovery stage. And then also some more general resources to signpost, not only to patients, but also to family and carers, including kind of that vocational support, financial support, and resource for the carers or people that find themselves in a caring role. So just to finish up, I wanted to highlight some clinical findings that I found interesting when conducting this study. So the first was how individualized each person's recovery journey and recovery experiences were throughout following a traumatic injury. And this research confirmed that recovery experiences are influenced by many factors, and there's a need for person-centered care. The next one is that it was really exciting for me, myself as a novice clinician, to see that there are so many opportunities to incorporate supported self-management, and people were keen to engage with healthcare professionals and receive information. And lastly is just highlighting that importance of when people are coming to us as healthcare professionals, they want information, they want kind of that clear communication, and that is something that we can kind of directly think about, thinking about all the other factors, but especially that they're really valuing kind of that information that we can provide. And with that, I will finish up a tiny bit behind time. Again, a huge thanks to the supervisory team and the clinicians at the North of Scotland Trauma Network, and for the participants for sharing their story. And thank you for listening to.
Summary of some of the issues and impacts of major injury, major and moderate injury. Do we have some questions from the audience for Laura?
And if not, that's okay too.
Hi, Laura, and thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I wondered if you had any sort of thoughts about how that information should actually be presented to people, and maybe when?
Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect question. Thank you so much, Anne. So when I started this research, I kind of thought of kind of the pie in the sky of there's a timeline, and I bet there's a way that we can say, okay, at hospital you need this information, at this point you need this, and almost making like a timeline and a pathway. But in doing the interviews, everyone's journey was so individualized, and some people, they wanted all the information right at discharge from hospital. Some others, they might have gotten it, but they cannot remember, or were just not in the place to kind of engage with that. And so having all of that information kind of a bit down the line, or even having, say, like a folder, or having basically a pack of resources is kind of more the path that I was going on, instead of kind of having this direct pathway that everyone follows, because everyone had different injuries, they had different kind of support that was available, even kind of where they were living as well. It was kind of virtual versus face-to-face appointments. So I think, long story short, I think it would be best if there was almost like an online and paper copies of kind of like all of the information they could possibly need, and then they're able to engage with it when kind of they're at that stage in recovery, because a lot of people kept little diaries and stuff, and they were the ones during the interview, they could be like, oh, I remember the day when I got my cast off, or I could drive again, or oh, this follow-up appointment was really useful because I got this information, allowed me to do this. So I think having not kind of a one size fits all, it's kind of, you just need a large pack, and then people can take what they want from it.
Okay, thank you. It was a great question. I suppose personalised information alongside personalised care is your message. Mm-hmm. Is there another question?
Oh. Are we ready for this? Hi there, my name's Kirsty. I'm from Northumbria University. I was wondering if you could give us one piece of advice that would change our practice today. What's the piece of advice you would give us?
Oh boy, that's a good one. One piece of advice. I was like trying to boil down 3 years of like the research into one, but I guess how I'm now working in the community and as a community physio, and I think the thing that I've kind of taken away from this research is that each story is quite different, and you almost need to consider all the different factors, which I feel like everyone kind of already does as a clinician, but that, yeah, the kind of that importance that everyone's story isn't the same, that it's not just a right hip replacement or it's not just a left hip replacement, that each person's story is so different, and finding how you can work with kind of the support that they do have, and also identifying areas that they might not bring up in kind of when you're speaking to them, but actually like, are you getting enough help in XYZ? So kind of considering, yeah, kind of I guess that person-centered care again has summed up nicely in the previous question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thanks so much to Laura again for opening. No. Okay, so then if I can go straight to Julia, Dr. Julia Das, if you'd like to come to the stand. MT, can you check the right slides? Because we haven't got the second. That's perfect. Thank you.
Lovely. Can you all hear me okay? Yep, lovely. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. My name's Julia Das. I'm a physiotherapist and research fellow based at Northumbria University. And I'm here today to talk to you about an evaluation of the Keep On, Keep Up programme for people with Parkinson's, which is a study led by Dr. Jill Barry at Northumbria in collaboration with Dr. Emma Stanmore and her team at Manchester University. So just to give a little bit of background about the study, we know that people with Parkinson's are generally less active than their age-matched controls, and they're also, 50% of them are falling regularly. So this has huge impacts on quality of life, hospital admissions, and obviously the impact on the carers and the wider community. Now, COCU is a tablet-based strength and balance programme, and it was developed by Dr. Emma Stanmore and her team at Manchester University, and it was specifically designed for older adults at risk of falls, frail older adults. The programme works through a series of strengthening and balance exercises based on the Otago exercise programme, and it starts off with really simple chair-based exercises and progresses to more challenging single leg stand crossover exercises that a lot of us will be familiar with. This study is funded by Parkinson's UK, and we've collaborated with Dr. Stanmore and our team at Manchester to trial the COCU app with people with Parkinson's, because at the moment it's validated for use with frail older adults, but not for people with Parkinson's. So just to give an overview of the study, it's really divided into 3 phases. I'm reporting predominantly on phase 1 today. We're looking to explore the usability and feasibility of the existing COCU app with people with Parkinson's. Phase 2 is a co-development phase. So we are bringing people with Parkinson's, clinicians, healthcare professionals, and the app developers, who are Reason Digital, based here in Manchester, to try and develop the app specifically for people with Parkinson's. And then the third phase, which is moving into June next year, will be to test the new improved COCU 4PD app for people with Parkinson's. So as I said, today I'm reporting predominantly on the phase 1 findings of the study. We recruited 20 people with Parkinson's from local movement disorder clinics, and we brought them into the Gait Lab at Coach Lane at Northumbria University and did some baseline assessments on their balance, cognition and gait. And then we sent them home with the COCU app on an iPad to trial for 4 weeks, with the guideline of using the app 3 times a week. Participants then came back into the lab and we reassessed balance, walking and cognition, and we also got them to answer some questions about the usability of the app. This was predominantly a feasibility study, but we did get some preliminary signals of efficacy for the app in its current form, and we had a mean improvement in the mini-best test, interestingly, after just 4 weeks of use, which was unexpected. We had a 4-point improvement in the mini-best test, particularly around the areas of gait and anticipatory postural responses. We also asked participants to complete some usability questionnaires. And again, system usability score rating came up in the 80s, which was excellent. And this was for the existing COCO app, so that was really promising. But we wanted to delve a little bit deeper into their experiences of using the app. So we carried out some one-to-one interviews. And we got some really positive feedback. So we had people saying, I've never been to a gym before. The app made every task look achievable. The app has been beneficial in showing people new ways to exercise. But what the one-to-one interviews also did was reveal some issues with the app that perhaps weren't working as well for our patients with Parkinson's. There was issues around motivation and incentives and frustration because they couldn't progress as they wanted to. So the next steps of the study, we formed some focus groups. We used the data from the phase 1 interviews, and we highlighted some key themes from those interviews around lack of guidance, progression, motivation, incentives, and tracking and logging of activity. And we used those themes as discussion points for focus groups with people with Parkinson's, clinicians, and the app developers. And from here, we generated a wish list of changes and modifications to the app, which patients felt would improve the app for people with Parkinson's, and that fit within our budget of £24,000 to develop the app. And the final phase of this study is to test the new COCO 4PD app with a new cohort of people with Parkinson's. Just like to acknowledge the team behind the study today. Emma, as I said, and her team in Manchester. Dr. Jill Barry leads the team at Newcastle University. We've got colleagues at Newcastle University as well, Professor Lynn Rochester and Alison Yarnell, and a special mention to our PPI collaborator, Mr. Tim Sims, who is a person with Parkinson's who's also on the study. My contact details are on the slide. Thanks very much.
Julia will come and join me on the stage for that. So can I invite Sarah and Ellie to come up and present their work?
Morning. That's not us. We can probably start without the slides if that's... Yeah. Yeah. Morning. Thank you very much for coming to listen to us. It's really lovely to be here. Our plan is to go really quickly through a feasibility study we've just done at Leeds Teaching Hospitals, where we've looked at the feasibility of virtual reality on acute neurosurgical wards. So we probably have the same challenges across many different acute services. We don't have any space for rehab. We certainly don't have the time that we'd like to spend with patients, and patients spend a lot of time in bed. Inspired by our community teams and our inpatient rehab units that are using more and more immersive technology, we thought it was about time that we looked at that in the acute setting. So Ellie and I both work in the neuro-oncology part of our team, but it covered wider neurosurgery, and it was funded by an NIHR grant, which helped us to buy the equipment. Still no slides. So the study design was adults, so over 16, who were admitted with a traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, or for neurosurgical intervention. And then while on the ward, they were offered virtual reality in addition to the standard rehab they would normally have. So that was from day 1 to the day of discharge. The primary outcomes, which I definitely don't know off the top of my mind, but were whether patients were willing to be recruited into the trial, whether they thought it was acceptable to use the technology, whether it was acceptable when they did use it, and whether it was feasible, the intervention fidelity. So would the Wi-Fi work? Could we get the iPads and the headsets to pair up? Did we have the physios with the technological skills to use those things? Probably the biggest concern of all. We linked with a company called Sync VR Medical, purely because they already work with Leeds Teaching Hospitals. And they have 2 apps that we use. So one is VR Fit, which is game-based, and the other one is Relax and Distract, which is most of our patients chose to lie on a beach with the sound of lapping waves and squawking birds to enhance their time in rehab.
So we approached 39 eligible participants, of which 3 declined due to anxiety around the technology or feeling unwell. Of the 36 consenting participants, 4 did not complete a VR session due to headaches, pain, or being discharged early and not having any rehab needs. This left 32 participants who completed at least 1 VR session whilst in hospital. A large, as our table demonstrates, a large proportion of the TBI patients that were screened were deemed ineligible due to lacking capacity, and due to our integration into the Research MDT in Leeds as a neuro-oncology physio team, there were more neuro-oncology patients screened and recruited compared to the other specialties. Interestingly, more participants chose the Relax and Distract, laying on a beach listening to lapping waves, than the Sync VR Fit. And importantly, for determining feasibility, no adverse outcomes were reported at 30 days. Patient-reported feedback was very positive overall, with the majority of participants reporting that they enjoyed using the VR device, they felt confident using it, and they felt it helped them learn about their rehabilitation. In fact, some of the problems that we anticipated as therapists, such as ease of use and technical complexity, were actually not reflected in the patient feedback. Perhaps most importantly, the majority of participants reported that they would like to use it more frequently, both as an inpatient and after discharge at home, which could be a very important step towards increasing patients' overall number of active hours. We have some photos of the VR being used, both in our rehab space on a plinth with more space around the patient, and also at the patient's bedside. So, in conclusion, we have demonstrated the feasibility of a virtual reality program in an acute neurosurgical inpatient environment to augment neurorehabilitation. We don't yet know if it is indeed effective in augmenting the neurorehab that we provide, but establishing feasibility means that effectiveness can now be explored. So we look forward to updating you, hopefully with our findings in the future, and thank you for listening.
So thanks so much, Sarah and Ellie. A really good presentation, in spite of no slides. Yeah, have a seat. Okay, could I invite Julia and Laura to come up? We're going to have some more questions. So we've got about 10 minutes before our next session. So if you'd like to ask the panel any specific questions about their work, or also any more sort of general questions that we could have more of a discussion around. I notice there's a question already right here.
My name's Callum. Thank you for fantastic talks. Thank you so much. A question to the second team. In terms of therapy intensity dosage, just approximately, how many kind of hours or doses did you get to them? And how much that did the patient do them by themselves or the family do for you to kind of free up that therapy time?
Is that for us?
For you, sorry, yeah. 3, sorry.
Just speak into the mic.
So we didn't aim for any particular target. Our patients were happy for between 10 and 20 minutes a day, but I think had we had potential to offer it more, they would have taken it up. Our patients currently get 20 minutes a day, probably on average, of physio rehab, a little bit more occupational therapists, but they aren't as well staffed as we are. So I think we're probably working on them having about 23.5 hours a day that they could potentially fill with this technology? Does that answer the question?
It does, no, thank you. And then just out of curiosity, how many pieces of kit did you have for the ward? I don't know how big the ward is, but was it kind of one passed around or?
We had 2 headsets that were used with across 2 neurosurgical wards, so a 64-bedded bed base. Obviously, all participants recruited weren't actively in the study at the same time, so we did, I can remember at least a handful of patients who asked to use the headset in their own time and actually spent 45 minutes, an hour at a time each day in bed, really actively using the device. So it was great to see that. Obviously that depends on a number of factors, being able to do it and being driven to do it, but I think that demonstrated the potential in the device.
There's a lot of this data so that's just in the final stages of amendments before it goes into the Journal of Neuroengineering. So the feasibility, which with obviously much more detail, will come out hopefully in the new year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. Just a show of hands, does anyone have experience of using these sorts of devices? Okay. Are you going to talk about that, Katie, when you do?
I'm not, no. Our feedback was that our patients found it really nauseous, made them very nauseous. We could never get the alignment in the middle across perfectly set up. So lots of our patients, they all like relaxation stuff. They absolutely love the beaches. And you said, should we do some painting now? Prefer lying on the beach, thanks. But we found nausea was a real issue with ours. And also the amount of, we work in a neuro intensive care, and the amount of cleaning we were doing between each infection control had a real challenge at the beginning, and we had to have everything had to be dippable and bleachable, and that was difficult. And electronics don't work like that. So that was our challenge.
Okay, sounds like location is everything, doesn't it? Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions from the floor?
So I was going to ask Julie, so you did the Cuckoo app, is that right? I was just going to ask, because normally, like with Parkinson's, we want like high intensity and large amplitude. You mentioned it was similar to the Ortega program. Is the dosage within the app, does it still incorporate the high intensity and large amplitude, or is it designed in a different way?
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons we wanted to trial it with people with Parkinson's, because it was specifically designed for frail older adults who weren't really accessing exercise at all. And we were aware that obviously a lot of our Parkinson's population need to be doing the big movements, they need to be doing much more high intensity. So obviously I've only reported on phase 1, but the findings from the focus groups that we did was similar from the clinicians and from the patients. They wanted a bit more. So in our modifications to the app, we've included big movement warm-ups. We've included some of those features that wouldn't routinely feature in a kind of a frail older population exercise program. There are lots of issues around progression and making the exercises more challenging. But I think where the Koku app sits is for an introduction to people that aren't currently exercising, who are new to exercise or for whatever reason can't get out and access community facilities. So I think that's where the merit will lie for those people that aren't confident to access the groups, and it'll act as a kind of stepping stone to be able to then perhaps have the confidence to go and access community setting groups or gym classes elsewhere. So really good question. It was really hard to tailor the app because people have such high expectations of tech now. We've got our smartwatches, we've got all of our Android, iOS stuff, and we had what we thought was a great budget of £24,000 to do modifications. And even one of the comments was we would like to tailor it so we had a male and female character, for example, to exercise with, and just to change to have a female choice versus a male choice was going to cost over £10,000. So it's blown the budget. It's huge. So people's expectations of tech are really big now because they have all these fancy wearable technologies, but we want this app to remain free and to be able to be usable within the NHS setting, and therefore the budget isn't quite what Apple have. But really good question. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you.
Okay. Anything online, Jackie?
Just like to ask a question for all of you, really, from the online guys, is if there's one thing that you know now that you didn't know at the start of your projects that could help other people taking their next steps? What would you say that would be, just to give advice for people following in your footsteps?
So from kind of a research point of view, I would definitely say having clear parameters on your kind of studies, and it sounds like kind of you guys had the clear expectations of like the feasibility versus the acceptability and kind of the different parts. So having really clear expectations of what you wanted to get out and maybe starting smaller, and then it will grow arms and legs on its own.
I think, so our physio team is very low level of skills within research at the moment. Hopefully that will change. But actually our medical colleagues have been really helpful. And I think probably being bold enough with ideas to take it forward to them, and they're really happy to help. We work with neurosurgeons who are not notorious for being the most helpful people on the planet, but actually they've been brilliant and they have those skills and they have staff who are really keen to help. So I think even if you feel like you can't do it right now, there will be people around who can help you take it forwards.
I mean, I would echo both of those comments. I think it's as physios, we're not necessarily, or certainly when I trained, we weren't trained to do research, and it's a daunting prospect. And collaborating with people either at your local university and knowing that you can access those resources and that there's people there that are willing to sort of facilitate your first steps in research is really important. And looking outside of your immediate region, events like this where you see people talking about things that are of interest to you, networking, talking, those conversations are how COCU started. My colleague Jill got chatting to Emma at Manchester on a conference a few years ago, and that's how the COCU app development sort of developed. So I think it's just really important to keep an open mind and use these opportunities to speak to people about people with similar interests.
Thanks. That's a really great comment, Julia, about the opportunity of networking, and you never know what those incidental conversations bring. I was going to ask a question that you've all talked really about using, I suppose, interventions in the broadest sense to support people with participation and connection and understanding of their condition, their recovery, their rehab, etc. Could you maybe just think about what you think are the real key opportunities going forward in that space, and what might be some of the challenges?
I think we are moving into an era now where even our older populations are really proactive in using technology, and I think as physios we're often a little bit sort of reticent maybe in terms of thinking, oh well, they won't be able to use an iPad, they won't be able to do X, Y and Z. And actually from the experience I've had working with a Parkinson's population and older adults, a lot of our patients do have access to smartphones and devices. They are keen to utilise them. And previous research we've done at Northumbria has shown that people actually feel more engaged and more motivated when they're given the opportunity to use aspects of technology. So I think it has a huge role to play in terms of bringing forward our rehab, virtual sessions as well. I think it's really important to think about how we can deliver our physio in a kind of more effective and efficient way, and particularly coming out of COVID now, we're seeing all the changes in terms of healthcare delivery, and I think we just need to try and embrace it, and we need to get up to speed as well with our technology kind of awareness, don't we? And as physios, it's very easy to get kind of channeled into ward work and realising there's probably better ways of doing things which involve smart devices and things.
Okay, thank you. Challenges, you've already talked about costs and making things of the same standard that people are used to. That sounds like a big challenge. How about you, Julia and Ellie? Opportunities and challenges?
I think in our line of work particularly...
Come on in. Just come in and find a seat.
We're so used to signposting patients to charity services and support services and so many different resources that are available to our neuro-oncology patients. But I think what this has taught us is being able to signpost people to other devices that might help them with their rehab. And it's an area that we didn't actually know a huge amount about before this. I had one patient who had an awake craniotomy and used this device twice as part of the trial and wanted to know everything about the technology, the device, and then went on to purchase one to use at home. So she then had one that she could use every single day and used a combination of the games-based activity and the relaxation function. So I think it's a huge sphere that we can upskill in, just to be able to help guide our patients and make sure that they are able to access everything that's available to them.
Yeah. So sounds like real opportunity in terms of supporting more engagement in supported self-management, for example. What do you think are the key challenges for your intervention going forwards? Yeah, either.
I think as neurophysios, I think we were quite sceptical that using something like a VR headset would induce lots of compensatory strategies and not actually maybe hinder the work that we were doing in our traditional rehab. But very personally, this is outside of the study findings, I think we were really pleasantly surprised by how it complemented what we were doing, and actually the patient feedback that it helped them to learn about their rehabilitation was definitely how it came across to us. We had, again, this was purely an observation, it wasn't a purpose of the trial, but we had one gentleman who had quite a significant inattention, and actually having the headset on just for a 10-minute session significantly improved his ability to attend to both sides, and actually, because of his competitive nature, get targets on both sides. And it was really quite amazing, the difference in such a short space of time. So I think we just had some real flashes of what it could provide.
Good, thank you. How about you, Laura?
So I think the opportunities coming on from my study, although I wasn't looking at kind of a specific intervention, since it was so specific to kind of people's experiences in the north of Scotland, basically it was one of those things of I've answered this question, but now there's loads of other types of research questions. And something really exciting was that the North of Scotland Trauma Network clinicians are kind of introducing kind of patient-oriented discharge summaries, or kind of adding that into kind of the rehab plan that they already have, and so that the research is already being used is really, like, honestly a wonderful feeling that it's kind of making a difference already.
Yeah, that did sound like a win-win, and not rocket science, and something that would be really, really enabling and helpful. Thank you for answering that question. Any more questions to our speakers from that last session? Do you want to come in and find a seat? Just leaves me then to say thank you very much to our 4 speakers for opening conference and really getting us off to a good start in terms of thinking about the ways that we can really use all kinds of interventions to support people with requiring rehabilitation for optimal recovery. So can you join me in thanking our speakers? So it's great. Do find a seat. It's great to see so many more of you in here. Can I now invite Katie, Jude and Alice up onto the stage from Plymouth Hospitals? Yep, that was all the intro they wanted, so over to them. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Kate Tantum. I'm a specialist sister in ICU rehabilitation down at University Hospitals Plymouth, and I'm incredibly proud to have on the stage with me Alice and Jude, both physio colleagues from Plymouth too. We're here to talk to you about the First Steps campaign and to share a little bit about what we did sharing our patient stories in Plymouth. I'm hoping that some of people in the room know about the Rehab Legend campaign. Can you put your hands up if you know about the Rehab Legend campaign? Oh, that makes my heart sing. So, as you know, I started the Rehab Legend campaign on my kitchen table. That little reflection is my incredibly classy PVC tablecloth, which you'll be pleased to know for sustainability I still have. I'm also very tight. So the Rehab Legend campaign started out because I was trying to start a rehabilitation push within my nursing staff within intensive care. So what I did was I got some badges printed. We had a hashtag, which was Rehab Legend. So a Rehab Legend is anyone who's done anything to enhance, promote or support rehabilitation. And I got the first 50 badges printed, and then I got the first 5,000 badges printed. And I'm now really proud to say we've given out 15,000 badges globally. We have a social media following, and we have our own website sharing rehabilitation stories of patient success. So it was using the Rehab Legend campaign and our importance of sharing stories that we wanted to push further. Now, I'm going to tell you a patient story. So this is a young man who was in our department with a really, really nasty flu, and he actually came through all of our team, so Alice knows him too. So this is his day one. This is 12 hours in intensive care, and if you can see it on the vent, as you can see, he's prone and he's on 90%. And within about 6 hours of coming into intensive care, he was in the back of an ambulance going to the Brompton to have some echo, because we absolutely knew that this gentleman was incredibly unwell and was in a significant amount of organ failure. He spent 4 months in the Brompton. He was filtered. He had multiple organ failure and was really, really challenged. When he came back to us in April of that year, he was unable really to lift his fingertips or to... He was one of the weakest chaps I've ever looked after. He was also profoundly low, because his last memory was just feeling a bit unwell in Cornwall and then waking up in intensive care in April with very, very significant delirium and feeling completely lost. Now, his rehabilitation goal was to get back out playing with his grandchildren. And the way that we got him engaged in his rehabilitation was we had an Easter egg hunt in our garden, and he was able to watch his grandchildren play. But his big goal was to be able to walk. So the first time he walked, when we were walking in parallel bars, we took a video of it and sent it to his loved ones. And we also shared it as a Rehab Legend story on Twitter. And the reason we did that is because what I was trying to do is I was trying to highlight the amazing amount of interprofessional work it takes to get somebody well. And across 3 different organisations, including Southwest Ambulance and our retrieve services, his journey was incredible. And what was beautiful about it was we were able to share his discharge story, but we were also able to get feedback from his clinical team in the Brompton. So completing the loop, because the one thing we all know about in the NHS is we're not really very good at saying thank you. We're not really very good at sharing our patient stories to be able to really understand the impact of what we're doing. Because I don't know about you, but I don't work in the NHS for the money, the parking, or the uniform. I work in the NHS because I fundamentally give a monkeys, okay? And I want to get people back to the people and the things that they love. So we share our Rehab Legend stories to innovate, to show excellence in clinical practice, and to be able to highlight the everyday genius that you are doing all of the time, and how amazing you and your colleagues are. So we took the First Steps concept. And I was really lucky. I did a Florence Nightingale scholarship at Windsor Castle and was able to meet the head of communications for the Cabinet Office. And I was like, this is random and really cool, but I'm going to go with it. And she said, well, do you know that communications companies and PR companies do pro bono work for projects? And so I said, no. And she said, have you heard about it? So you can imagine how the conversation went. So she put me in contact with a private PR company, and I said, I really want to share Rehab Legend stories to be able to really push the boundaries of how we share patient stories to engage stakeholders. And we came together and we came up, well, why can't you take somebody's first footprints and put them across the UK on posters? Now, the first time she said it, my face was exactly the same as yours. And the first time I pitched it to these two, their face was exactly the same. And the first time I tried to get anyone from across the UK to be able to support, they all said exactly the same thing, which was, show me the risk assessment. So we did it because we wanted to have a change.org petition to be able to petition that everyone has a right to rehabilitation, and there should be a rehabilitation lead in every organisation and health board in the UK. And we did it by literally putting paint with sand on patients' feet. And it was, an exciting couple of days. However, we did the dynamic risk assessment, and we did it, and we videoed it, and I'm going to show you some of the videos that we did, and here's some of our patients sharing their first footprints. And these first footprints went on 10 posters across the UK. Now, vinyl kitchen flooring was what we used, and we stuck them on posters in all of these different cities. And the thing that is really cool about this project is this is the first time tactile, real patient footprints, so tactile posters, have ever gone up anywhere. Now, bearing in mind, this started off as a coffee conversation in Windsor Castle 3 years ago, and everyone else I had pitched this idea to, bar the CRA and bar the CSP, looked at me as though I'd had a stroke you can see how actually from, small acorns, great oaks grow. So this is you can see on the Right to Rehab campaign board, there's a big picture of a lady called Jo, and that's Jo's footprints, and Jo launched that one in Plymouth, and we had it as a roving poster. This is Bristol. And at the same time, we also launched a First Words campaign. And the First Words campaign was all about sharing somebody's first words since waking up in intensive care, but also first words since becoming unwell, because we really wanted to highlight the impact of that. So I'm going to share with you our radio campaign. We were lucky enough to be supported by Richard Hammond, and we had 2 weeks on heart radio.
Rehabilitation has given me back my voice after my stroke. Now I'm using my first words to appeal to you. Please join our campaign and help more people get their voices back. Thank you.
Shockingly, rehab isn't available everywhere in the UK. Help end this postcode lottery at petitionforrehab.com.
We also had a Spotify banner that we were lucky enough to get in the Independent for 2 weeks. And I think the key thing about this was that it was trying to really highlight that learning to walk is just such a formative, fundamental thing. And the plan was to build out the campaign into first hug, first wash, first mouthful of your favourite food, to be able to absolutely highlight the genius and the beauty of the multidisciplinary team. We've got the petition, and if you'd like to sign it and you'd like to see all of our patient stories, you can do that on petitionforrehab.com. And we were really lucky to get some really cool celebrity involvement supporting. We had a little bit of success on our statistics. Clearly, I always wanted more. I wanted to get to 100,000 in 2 weeks, and we're not there yet. But I am somebody who's not good at saying no. And we created a video for the World Health Organization short videos competition, and this is a collation of all of the stories. One of the radio slots that we were going to use was a patient who'd had a high spinal cord injury and was ventilated in intensive care, and this is literally day 2 of her having a speaking valve, and you'll see her story now.
I was down here for a weekend. It's a great place to ride motorbikes. When I stood up, I ended up really banging my head against a tree over the top of my head, and just took me off the back of the bike. See, I'm lying on the floor. I can't breathe. Can't move, can't talk.
Every year, millions of Brits need rehabilitation to help them recover from an injury or illness.
Quite powerful, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
Andrew had a craniectomy
Okay.
because your brain swelled,
Yeah.
didn't it? And they needed to take away the skull to let your brain swell and recover.
They said I had a bilateral, so both sides strong underneath and my brain's done.
I had a painful small toe on my right foot. It was a bit inflamed. Podiatrist had a look and said it was pre-gangrenous, so they decided to amputate.
Shockingly, rehab isn't available everywhere in the UK. It's a postcode lottery.
Everyone needs rehabilitation to get them back on their feet. The really sad and shocking thing is that rehabilitation isn't available for everyone. It depends completely where you live.
Everybody should have access to help after such a traumatic event in their life.
Rehabilitation should be open to everybody. They should get it as soon as possible.
We set out to change things by showing the power of rehab to get people back on their feet. We captured patients' first steps since an injury or illness. The actual footsteps will be turned into posters. The posters will ask people to sign a petition aimed at making rehab available everywhere. We'll also run a radio spot in which a patient uses her first words since an accident to appeal for support.
Please join our campaign. Rehab matters.
Our goal is to make politicians and the public realise the importance of rehab.
Even when something had to throw it. It's happened. It's important to not to have to write over your life. Me, I made that possible.
While reminding everyone just how easy it is to take the little things for granted.
What are you looking forward to?
Back of my mouth.
You're a little rat bag, you are. Time with the cats? Yeah? Normal things, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Take you shopping and...
I love shopping. That's one thing I miss most of all.
It's been slow progress, but it gives me hope that I can walk on the moor again one day, and that's really important.
So with that video, with the campaign, we had an event in Parliament supported by the Community Rehab Alliance to get stakeholders in the room to really understand what it means to be a patient, because the understanding of rehabilitation still just isn't there amongst our parliamentarian and actually sometimes even amongst our hospital colleagues. Alice is going to tell you about what she said when I first told her we were going to do it.
I said yes.
Yeah.
I said yes. And then thought I would apologise later to any of higher management that might have not thought it was such a sensible idea to put... It was still quite slippery paint on the feet, you know, let's face it. There was sand, but it was obviously we made it look really easy in the videos. So essentially, just wanted to put a nod to the fact that all three of us work in 3 different departments across 2 different sites. And when these opportunities come up and, you know, if Kate sends an email asking a question, generally you try and say yes. So it's just a kind of nod to the fact that we are all one big team in terms of, regardless of what organisation you work for, what team you work for, kind of remembering that the patient is at the centre of it. They're the one who, most of the people in those kind of videos had gone through all of our different departments, and it's not losing sight that the person is genuinely in the centre of everything that we do. So we have to kind of unite our services, stop gatekeeping, stop worrying that this is our project, not your project, share information, kind of working together really as one big team. And I just like that saying, sitting is the new smoking, kind of the nod towards, we've talked about activity levels, the importance of activity levels generally. We know that people that are hospitalised, people that have got longer term conditions are generally much less active than they would have been either pre-condition or pre-coming into hospital. So it's kind of the idea that it's everyone's responsibility really to help improve activity levels and kind of realise that the nursing people in bed kind of archaic view of that will help someone get better isn't really true anymore. People need to be up out of bed, engaging in rehabilitation services, regardless of what setting they're in. They can't wait until they're in a rehab setting to start rehabilitation. It starts as soon as they are able and well enough to participate. So the aim is that we all should be trying to improve our services to ensure that everyone's got a right to rehab. And then the little nod of, if not you, who? And if not now, when?
So what are we asking you to do? Well, I'm asking you to share your rehab legend stories. I'm asking you to literally do what it says on the T-shirt. Okay, so you have patient stories, you have genius in your teams, you know exactly what patients and what things you need to do. You know what data you need to collect. We know that we need clinical research that's led by our whole multidisciplinary team. We've spoken already this morning about the excellent examples of clinical research that are going on. We know that the NIHR is pushing for more access to rehabilitation research. We know that this stuff matters, but you need to partner it with making your stakeholders give a monkeys. And that means you need to be sharing your patient stories. If you can make your audience cry, you will get them. And that's exactly the game that we have to play. Let's make them give a... I said I wouldn't swear. Let's make them care And you do that by sharing patient stories. You need the clinical research, and this is, I like it, I call it my little triad of genius. You also absolutely need the economics. If we do not have the economics, we will not be able to get anyone to do anything. So I need these three things, and then we need to be taking these three things to stakeholders. And I don't mean stakeholders just in your department. I don't mean stakeholders just in your trust. I don't mean stakeholders just in your region. I'm talking about NHS England. I'm talking about Jenny Keane. I'm talking about all the legends who have the capacity to help us change our services for our patients.
So I have a foot in both camps because I'm management as well as clinical. So I'm the consultant therapist for neurosurgery. I'm the complex lead for rehab for the trust. And it does matter what we do. It matters because we're good at it. We do it for the patients because it affects their future, but also it benefits the trust. You know, if we do it, if we invest in our therapy services, if we have actually access to do the rehabilitation with the patients. I don't know how many of you have had all your gyms removed for more beds, but we have had quite a few removed, not on neurosurgery, and we had another one created after COVID, simply because of the work that we did in COVID, which made some of our clinicians realise the value of the therapy team. It reduces their length of stay, and we proved that as well with having increase in shorter length of stay in our healthcare of the elderly wards, which was where we had the additional gym inserted after COVID. We know that we can have shorter durations of delirium. It improves quality of life for the patient, and we get a quicker recovery and better functional independence at your hospital discharge, and therefore your burden of care is less. And physiotherapy works, the CSP did a piece of work on this in 2015, and Cochrane has done a review of that. The final thoughts really from us are that we're facing a crisis in healthcare, and inequality is everywhere. The first thing that I do when I see a new patient is find out where they're from, and at that point I know whether I'm going to have problems getting them the package of care or the discharge or the community rehab teams that have been particularly denuded. We obviously cover quite a rural, geographically large area, and we piece together what we can, but it's not easy a lot of the time. And it is very much a postcode lottery of where they live. It's also a postcode lottery of your condition as well, because certain conditions get you more than others. As an MDT, we wanted to highlight these things, and that's why we go along with some of Kate's mad ideas. It's always for the betterment of the patients and our staff. Obviously, we know earlier intervention is better. Except there will be risk, and we did do some on the back of a fag packet
dynamic risk assessments.
When we were putting the paint on people's feet.
Evolving.
There are multiple locations for patients to access rehab. Rehab is not just done to a patient. The patient is involved in their rehabilitation. Every patient, every person on that patient's journey can partake in that, and we've seen the stuff that we talked about this morning with regards to the apps and the visual headsets and things, because we do need to be creative now. We don't have the capacity in the staff, the volume of staff that we used to have, and every patient should have access to equal rehab wherever they are and whatever their condition. And to make progress happen, there always has to be the first step. Rehab, of any rehab, we see everybody here who's clinical will see that first patient on that first day. That's their first step to rehab, isn't it? They'll have met the nurse before that, the doctor before that. We're all involved in this, even down to our lunchologists, as I call them, who run basically the ward and know everything about everything. So everybody's involved, and I think Kate has the last word. Always.
That is not true. So I love this Barack Obama quote, and the reason I love it is because you were the people in the room who could make this better. COVID was really, really hard, and it was really, really illuminating, because it made me realise that there was a line in the sand moment where I could wait for something to get better, or I could just JFDI it. And I don't know if you know what JFDI it means, but you can imagine, can't you? I'm not going to wait any longer for people to make this better. Now, if we think that the NHS is a super tanker, okay, and we all push on the same spot on the super tanker, we can change it just by half a degree. And that half a degree means that in 5 years' time, we will be in a completely different continent. So what I'm asking you to do is I'm asking you to be a rehab legend. I'm asking you to share your stories. I'm asking you to engage in the clinical research. And I'm asking you to look at the economics of recovery and your services and prove how absolutely phenomenal you are for your patients, your outcomes, and your organisations. Thank you so much. We've got time, I think, for some questions.
Speak to the mic, into the mic. Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Just here.
Can you hear me? My name is Guiomar. I'm one of the lecturers at University of Bolton teaching physiotherapy. And I was interested to know if in Rehab Legend you get any stories coming not just from physios, not just from allied health professions. I'm interested also in nurses and other people that are traditionally professionals not seen as rehabilitators who are key, especially in acute care. I was interested in that.
So Rehab Legends is absolutely a multi-professional, loved one and patient campaign. I give out badges to anyone who's been epic. I don't care what you do and I don't care what colour your trousers are, nor do I care where you work in the organisation. If you've done something with a patient, for a patient, that's what matters. And if you're sharing your patient's story, the whole point about Rehab Legend is it absolutely is not discipline specific, nor is it condition specific. So I'm really proud to say that we now have forensic rehab mental health units having Rehab Legend badges and Rehab Legend events. So we're now in every continent but Russia, which isn't bad as it started on my kitchen table.
You've almost answered my question. So I work in mental health. I have a cracking rehab story that I've just written up as a case study. It's not very scientific. Is that the type of thing you're after?
Yeah. So I think we need to have data in the right places at the right time. We need to have economics in the right places at the right time. And we need to have stories. We need to have stories because we need to make people understand the reality of NHS services and the challenges that our patients go through.
To CEO level, and it had quite an impact. So it's just like, how do I do the next step with it? Because it was a great story and I had permission from the patient.
So I think, and it's liaison with our partners in the Community Rehab Alliance and all of the other kind of partners that we can, I think the best places we can share this is we need to share it locally, regionally, and we need to share it nationally. And we need to share it nationally in a way that makes the patient feel safe and held, our services feel supported, and we must not feel afraid to share our patients and our experiences of working in the organisation. The only way we're going to make it better is if we share the stuff that happens day to day, because I think there is a disconnect sometimes with what we are seeing and feeling, what our patients are seeing and feeling, and what is being reported to NHS England.
Thanks. I think we've got time for one more question.
Yeah. I was just wondering where you saw kind of the charity and the private sector in this, because where I work in Kent, it's a very, very mixed economy. If you want rehab, it's run by a charity or it's the private sector. They're all NHS patients, but they're just being treated in the charity sector or in the private sector. So, yeah, I was just wondering kind of what your thoughts were about that.
I'm sure Sarah will talk to this in her session after us and about the new amazing augmented reality next steps. I think that I would go back to why are we having to use charity services to support patients have access to rehabilitation, and why are we having to use private services? We're having to use them because we don't have the infrastructure potentially within the organisations, or that we're getting condition-specific stuff.
So I would just say that kind of the way the health economy has worked in that area, that is where your further rehab units are. So, you know, there is no NHS option. It's kind of, but do you know what, that's okay, because actually they're still NHS patients, they're still getting a really excellent service, and actually there's pros and cons to all of those sectors.
I think we have to map the services, map the patient requirement, map the impact of the interventions that we're doing to create the right services for the right patient at the right time with the level of therapies and with the level of rehabilitation that they need. I think that this is a beast to be unpicked, and I wouldn't want to be Jenny Keane because it's hard. But I think as clinicians, what we can do is share our experiences of rehabilitation to be able to improve our patient experiences.
I mean, we use our charitable voluntary organisations, third sectors, all the time to facilitate with, you know, like Headway, SIA, Backup, Aspire, Stroke Association. We tap into all of that to provide that safety net around the patient. So I think they're valuable. I think you're right. There are various different rehab units, particularly around the southwest. Some are half private, some are half NHS, but they're still being paid for by the Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a really good question, and I'd just like to finish by saying thank you so much to Jude, Alice and Katie for a really passionate, enthusiastic, fantastic presentation for us. Really strong commitment to the Rehab Legends work, and hope that its impact and its partnership with Community Rehab Alliance will go from strength to strength from here. So if you can join me in thanking you. Would you just like to come and sit down if you're standing at the back? Please do come down. I'd now like to invite Sarah Hazard to the stand. Sarah is Assistant Director at CSP and responsible for the strategic leadership of community rehabilitation. Our previous speakers talked quite a lot about the postcode lottery around location, condition, social deprivation. Actually, all these things are really critical in how rehabilitation is planned, organised and delivered. And this is no mean feat within the community. And Sarah will talk about the CSP's role in leading the community movement, community rehab movement. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. So I now know two very certain things about Kate, one of which I've already shared with her, which is that if I ever had the misfortune to wake up in ICU and I saw her face and the team of physios around her, I'd know something both very awful has happened and something very amazing is about to happen. The other is that we clearly share a love of feral language that we cannot use in conference. We probably share more in common than that. So there are three things that I'm going to cover very quickly. Kind of what's happening, what's the broader part of the campaign of Right to Rehab, part of which we partnered on and part of which we talked already about storytelling, and I'm going to do a little bit more of that. And part of that is that if anything I say is remotely useful and you can go out and convince somebody else with those same lines, please use them and please claim them as yours. The second is if you have anything useful that I can take away from this, including another badge so that I do successfully end up looking a little bit like the pearly queen at the end of this, please do donate me that badge. I will wear it with pride. And do let me know your hack because I will use it and claim it as my own. So let's get straight into it. First Steps was wonderful for all those reasons. Every time I see those videos, I need a box of tissues. I absolutely refuse to cry today before this. That's who I am. That's not that interesting. So, bit of context. The CRA, which is convened by the CSP, the movement is led by the physio profession, but in partnership with 65 health and social care organizations. And at any time, if you want more information, I'll let you go to the website. Don't despair if you come from any place in the UK, because actually we're active everywhere, and apologies if I go slightly overly England-centric for a moment, but it's a very, very small amount of time. And if I just think about the sort of immediate context, and I'm going to pick on it because she said Jenny Keane, and she's here tomorrow morning, and she's actually, if you think her job was a nightmare before, she's just had a promotion. She's the director of UEC, so Urgent and Emergency Care Plan. Think about being in charge of that for NHS England. Very much still sees rehab as a key part of what she does, because she knows she's not going to fix that problem without having alternative services that divert people away from hospitals. So we've had the success of, as the Right to Rehab campaign, of lobbying for that role, because something that Ruth and I learned very early on is you need people on the inside. We also know that we've got the intermediate care framework. It's a great blueprint for hospital discharge, probably a great blueprint for some other things, but let's face it, it's a framework, and framework isn't implementation. Last government said rehab is as important as medicines and surgeries. Now we've got a new government. We knew that was happening. Happened a little bit faster than we had planned for, but that's okay. We were busy sort of thinking about what could we do with some of this amazing sort of content from first steps to make it live and breathe and cut through what, quite frankly, was going to be and is a horrendously noisy, fast environment of politics with a lot of new politicians who, quite frankly, are quite green. Well, you could be sitting there thinking, the context should speak for itself. Why do we have to peddle this so hard? 1 in 4 adults, has one or more long-term health conditions. And in just over a decade, 2 in 3 will be the statistic. And anybody running any sort of business or organization, if they were looking at stats like that, would be thinking, I can't just stand still and do what I'm doing right now. But in a noisy, fast, new environment, it's not just what our cause is, but it's how we go at it. And so starting a conversation and why somebody should listen to us and why somebody should remember us is really important. Now, I could start any of these conversations with a myriad of data, empirical evidence, stats. I could say anything from, it's 50% of people, cardiac rehab are actually getting it, 85% of people should be getting it if we followed the plan. That would result in 50,000 less hospital admissions per year. I could throw out stroke ones, about a third of people having a stroke getting the rehab, but if actually people get it, then they're a third less likely to have a repeat stroke, and it goes on and on and on. But that's not what I do, because like you, I don't have very much time if I have a moment to influence, or if I have a room even. And I just say something that's really simple. It's a really simple story I tell, and I go, so if any of us, if I had a catastrophic incident, event, accident, and I lived in an area where I couldn't get rehab, and I could afford it, it's so good, I'd pay for it. And so would you. Now that's great news for rehab, because that says everything that I need to say about how I know it works. It's really bad news for health equity. So we have work to do. We can't just sort of stop there. So let's have a think about this. What is it that we want to influence? Well, there's 3 things. Again, you can steal any of these if you like, and you can add your own. But investment has to follow ambitions. What do I mean by that? If people want to reduce Category 3 and Category 4 paramedic call-outs, then we have to design services that mean people don't pick up the phone at that point as a 999 call. And we have to design services that if people do, that they're seen to in another way. Otherwise, we're right back where we started with the same problem, only now we're not dealing with 1 in 4, we're dealing with 2 in 3. And that's a big predicament. Forget the NHS being broken, it's going to be broke. What's the second one? This is really savvy. Use all the available workforce. Why would I say that? I'm paid by the CSP. I work for you as members. If I go up and I try to influence and I go, we need more physio. We need more physios. We need more workforce. Then, of course, you're going to say that, Sarah. You work for the CSP. Might be the co-chair of the CRA, but, you are physio. But if I say use all the available workforce, and I say recruit to capability, what do you think the next set of questions includes? Where's the workforce going to come from? And they've just given me this wonderful opening to go, well, it can come from quite a few places, and I can name those, but in and amongst those, I can say, physio has no pipeline problem. Physio is inundated with people that want to study it. Physio is inundated with people that want to work in it. Create the jobs. Create the posts where people need them, and people will fill them. And obviously that gives me another opening to say, and stop deleting these empty posts to make your books balance, because it's a really false economy. And so if it's a minister, and then obviously in the Labour conference, if you saw the pictures, we got each and every one of them, including one colleague who dragged Steve Kinnock, I think, from the toilet to our stand. I mean, wherever men want to do business, it's fine. It works for the physio profession. So that was number 2, yeah? So use all the available workforce. Number 3, we don't need more exemplars. You guys have done sterling work. We have been absolutely impressed and able to use it. And if you haven't got a ticket yet to the lunchtime film screening of 2 of these types of services that I'm talking about that are absolutely amazing and have broken ground. But actually, what we need is to scale, because we're going from 1 and 4 to 2 and 3. So we don't need more exemplars. We do need you to collect your data. We do need you to use it, and we do need you to share it, whether it's to create more services locally in terms of implementation, or it's actually to create more services anywhere and everywhere across the UK. That's a big responsibility for this profession, but I think you're up to it. Okay, so some of you were raring to go when you came in here. Some of you hopefully are raring to go now. Some of you have been active all along. I can see those faces, and I can see Karen Poole out there, speaking of exemplars. And some of you would not be faulted for thinking, oh my God, Sarah, what do you want me to do? I'm busy enough doing what I already do. Okay, let's make this easier. I don't have access to those people you're talking about. I don't have time. I don't have the confidence. Any one of those, not to worry, because like any good sort of building those atomic habits, a little bit at a time. Let's think about what you do next. So, what we actually did, and what you can experience on the CSP stand, is we took first steps, which we helped with sort of the parliamentary and the kind of how do you sort of take this to decision makers, and we looked at the marvelous creativity of Kate and the team, and they had worked with Pablo, the agency was called Pablo, and we thought, let's do something that makes it real. And we thought, let's get people to walk in these steps. So we used something called augmented reality, and you can try it out on the stand, but you can also get the QR code and you can take it with you, and this is going to make your influencing job really easy, hopefully. So what are you going to do? Well, between today and tomorrow, if you're here tomorrow as well, you go to the CSP stand, you'll see some pink bits around it, and you can go try out the experience. It takes about 4 minutes. If you've got headphones, or if you don't, we've got them. It's really good because you get the whole story pulled together, both Joe and everyone else's. When you do that, if you're really still feeling up to something else, there's a pink wall. You can take a board and make a commitment to be a rehab champion, and that can be as much or as little as you feel able to do at this point. If you've done all that, you can bring it back to colleagues at work. If you have access, great, you can bring it back to other people. Talk about, Kate saying, look, get people to connect with it emotionally. This is your chance to take that story there, and they not only get to experience it, but they walk in those footsteps. And then if you're really feeling kind of energized at that point, you can join the ICSP Influencers Network, and you can see where that takes you next. But that's a starting point if you're just sitting there and wondering, how do I get into this? And you don't have to do all of those. You could just start with the first one. So take a walk in Joe's footsteps. And just to let you know, you'd be in very good hands. So this is our head of policy and our public affairs lead at the CSP. Oh yeah, and the guy in the middle is the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. And this is to make you think that it's really live and buzzing by the stand right now. And this is, I feel such a fraud when it's my name here because the team has done such an amazing job at pulling this together. I'm showing up and I get the really good job. But this is an Exchange 11. This is also, I'm told, a way to skip the lunch queue because you get your lunch there as well. And there actually is popcorn, if you have seen it popping at any point around here. There is actual live popcorn happening at this. So if I haven't sold it for any other reason, and I think I've got a bunch of tickets down there, and you'll find some other people with tickets. So I did say I'd leave some time for any hacks that you have, and so I hope I have left a couple of minutes. Have I, timekeeper? 2 minutes.
I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, Sarah. Anyone want to raise any comments or questions? I think people are keen for the tickets and the coffee, maybe.
Fair enough.
Oh, great. Kate.
Hi. That was brilliant, thank you. We mentioned earlier we work in neuro-oncology, and our charities are amazing but are very evidently missing from the screen that came up earlier. How do we engage brilliantly with them, they listen to us, how do we get them to be part of the Alliance?
So is this a standalone oncology charity?
So neuro-oncology, so...
Sorry, neuro charity.
So there's Macmillan there, but I think the neuro-oncology population is really well represented by different charities that I'm not sure Macmillan necessarily represent.
Yeah. Macmillan is part of the, is that what you're asking?
Well, I kind of want the Brain Tumour Charity and Tessa Jowl Alliance and those sorts of...
Yeah, there's quite a few. So there's UK BIF, there's the Neuro Alliance, there's quite, are those the ones that you're looking for?
Yeah, so they're not currently in...
They are, yeah.
Can I ask if you potentially just make contact
with come and
CSP,
chat to me.
and we'll look into that.
Some were on the stand because they had about 3 days to join in. We offered them to join in the experience. But 65 organizations are in the sort of the whole of the Alliance. It's quite a good representation, but it's not a closed shop. It's not a club. It's an alliance of partners who the shared endeavor, because obviously all have many of their own agendas, as do we, but the shared endeavors around patients' right to rehab.
Thanks so much. And since Sarah did a shameless plug for her session, I'm also going to do a couple of plugs.
Oh yes, I should have plugged that
The
too.
first is to pick up on Sally Singh's presentation. Professor Sally Singh will be talking about the NIHR multimorbid rehab study, which is a really exciting research initiative looking at what transformed rehabilitation might look like. So I would really encourage you, if you've got real interest in rehab, to go there. If you're a rehab leader or champion, as Sarah was describing, please come to our workshop session this afternoon, which is being led by the inspirational rehab leaders within the profession to really share their stories, their experience, and their expertise with you in that session this afternoon. That's at 2:20 in Exchange 9. But just leaves me to say thank you to Sarah for a really brilliant walkthrough of all the campaigning and transformation work that CSP is doing around community rehab. It's a lot. It's a long-term thing. It really is. But we've got great partners, and we believe that in the way that physios work most effectively as part of a team, so do we. So we're really grateful to all our partners as well. But if you can join me in thanking Sarah. Thank you.